Welcome to Betrayal Narrative X.
James closed the door of his house and breathed in the cool evening air. He loved these moments, when he could relax after a long day at work, sit with his wife, play with his sons. His whole life was built on stability, trust, and family. He worked hard to make sure that Linda and their children Justin and Kevin never needed anything. Let's get acquainted. Write in the comments, what city and country are you from? But something was wrong this evening. When he opened the door to the living room, he was not greeted by the joyful voices of the children. Linda didn't look out of the kitchen with a smile. There was a strange silence in the house. He walked on and froze when he saw his wife standing by the stairs with her bags in her hands. What's going on? His voice was calm, but anxiety was building inside. Linda looked at him with an expression he'd never seen before. There was no love or guilt in her eyes, just cold indifference. "I'm leaving," she said, as if it was the most ordinary thing in the world. James didn't immediately understand the meaning of her words. What? Where? Roberts. Those two words hit harder than any fist could. He blinked slowly, trying to comprehend what he was hearing. Robert, his best friend, the man he considered a brother. Are you kidding me? James' voice became hoarse. Is this some kind of prank? But Linda only sighed and rolled his eyes, as if he was a child who couldn't grasp the obvious. I love him, James. I've been meaning to tell you for a long time. Robert proposed to me, and I said yes. We'll live together. James couldn't move. His heart was pounding in his chest, and his brain was desperately searching for an explanation. How is that possible? How is that possible? Robert, Linda, and the children? He finally squeezed out. They'll stay with me. You can see them, sometimes. You can't just take them away. James' voice trailed off. It doesn't work like that. Linda smirked. Oh, it's working. I already have a lawyer, and believe me, the court will take my side. I'm the mother, and you'll be replaced. Those words burned him from the inside out. Replaced? Who? Robert. Someone he'd known for over 15 years? Someone he trusted with his deepest secrets? Linda took a step toward the door, but before she stepped out, she dropped the last word. Just accept it, James. We both know you can't change anything. James sat in his office, clutching the papers that were turning his life upside down. It was a divorce suit in which Linda was demanding full custody of the children, half of their joint assets, and additional alimony, even though she had already left for another man. He reread the lines several times, but every letter seemed poisoned. Sitting next to him was Sarah, his lawyer and longtime acquaintance who had taken the case, realizing he was facing an unequal battle. They're well prepared, she said, slowly spreading out the papers on the table. Linda's hired one of the best family lawyers, and Robert seems to be preparing the ground to deprive you of even the minimum right to vote. James leaned back in his chair and ran his hand over his face. Are they hoping for something? They think I'm just going to give up. Sarah frowned and nodded toward the papers. That's the problem. They don't think they're sure. Linda presented you in the documents as a man who was totally immersed in his work, supposedly spending little time with his children. And Robert has recorded statements from several acquaintances saying that he's already replaced you as a caring father. How can you just take a man out of the lives of his own children? The court hearing didn't take long. On the day of the hearing, James entered the room, trying to keep his cool, but when he saw Linda and Robert, he realized that he had already lost. They were sitting side by side, their hands clasped together, their expressions confident, as if they knew the outcome in advance. The judge began the hearing, and Linda's attorney was the first to take the floor. Your Honor, our evidence establishes that the defendant has been consistently absent from his sons' lives, focusing more on work than family, whereas my client and Mr. Robert are caring parents already providing a stable and loving environment for the boys. James wanted to object, but his lawyer gestured for him to be quiet. She knew that an outburst of emotion would only play against him. Then Linda came forward. I put up with this marriage for a long time, hoping it would change. But the children shouldn't have to suffer because of a cold and indifferent father. They are already used to Robert and call him their daddy. Those words made him tense up. Who gave her the right to speak for his sons? But it was even worse from there. Robert stood up and spoke calmly. I'm not trying to replace James, but the kids are drawn to me. They said they feel calmer and happier when I'm around. I want their lives to remain stable, not torn between two different homes. When it was his turn to speak, he stood up and looked directly at the judge. I was a good father, he said calmly but firmly. I worked for my children, so they could have a better future. I never raised my voice at them, never made them suffer. I am their father, and no one has the right to replace me. He looked around the hall. Robert is my former best friend, a man who betrayed me in the most despicable way. This trial is not about who cares more about the kids. It's about someone determined to cut me out of their lives. Silence hung in the hall, but the judge looked unmoved. After a short meeting, the decision was made. The children stay with their mother, and James gets the right to schedule appointments. The judge continued. Given the stability provided by mother and her partner, the court finds that a change of residence would be traumatic for the children. After the trial, James sat in his empty house, trying to figure out what to do next. The children did not go to his side because they were told he had betrayed them. They didn't know the truth. They just believed what they were told. Linda got everything he wanted. Robert took his place. Several months have passed since the night Linda left, leaving behind a void and a broken marriage. James had endured a long legal battle where Linda and Robert did everything they could for the families. They said that he had always been a cold father, that he was only interested in business, that he had no time for the children. The court took their side, and now James could see his sons once every 2 weeks, and even then on a strict schedule. He spent sleepless nights analyzing the situation, trying to find any weakness in their perfect picture. Linda seemed confident of her victory, and Robert was enjoying his new status as head of the family. But James knew there were no perfect people. Everyone had their weaknesses. He just had to find them. The first thing he decided to do was check on Robert. They had been friends for over 15 years, but now James realized that he didn't know the man as well as he had previously thought. Robert had problems with finances in the past, and even a few years ago he had tried to launch his business, but had lost the entire amount of his investment in an unknown way. James hadn't even asked questions then because he trusted his friend. A few calls to old contacts, a bit of information from mutual acquaintances, and the truth began to emerge. It turned out that Robert had lost his money not by accident, but because of unsuccessful bets on sports sites. He had invested everything he had at the time, hoping to get rich quickly, but ended up in serious debt. People don't change. If he was a gambler then, he probably still is now. James began following him through social media, bank statements, even through his old business connections. He was looking for signs that Robert had gotten involved in risky games, and he didn't have to wait long. A post appeared in his account about a new investment project that was supposedly going to bring huge profits in a short period of time. But James already knew what financial schemes built on lies looked like. Robert loses money again. James knew that Linda was not the kind of person who would tolerate instability. She wanted affluence, security, comfort. She loved luxury and had always aspired to a higher standard of living. When they were married, she always wanted a better house, a more expensive car, brand-name things. James worked hard to make sure she didn't need anything, but Linda always found a reason to say it wasn't enough. Now she lives with Robert. If his hunch is correct, Robert's money is starting to disappear, which means their relationship is about to start cracking at the seams. James began ordering extracts of Robert's financial statements using legal loopholes and banking connections. He also hired a private investigator who could track Linda's movements. It didn't take long to see the results. The first thing he learned was that Linda had already begun to doubt her choice. She had dated other men several times, presumably rich ones, and did not hide her disappointment with her current life. Second, Robert began to hide his finances, probably fearing that Linda would find out the truth. He made odd transfers, shifting money between accounts, taking out small loans that he quickly paid off. But the best part came later. Linda started looking for a lawyer. James realized that their perfect love was crumbling, even if they didn't realize it yet. He saw the dynamics, money problems, mistrust, disappointment. All of this had happened before, and now he decided to speed up the process. Discreetly send an anonymous letter to Robert, hinting that Linda is cheating on him. Let Linda know that Robert is hiding financial problems from her so that she begins to doubt his worthiness. Find a way to push their foreheads together so they start to suspect each other. James didn't want to just watch them ruin their own lives. He wanted to take an active part in this. Robert stood at the window in his office, clutching the phone nervously in his hands. For the past few weeks, he had been feeling a growing tension that kept him awake. Linda had become irritable, distant, capricious, as if everything that had once attracted her to him had suddenly disappeared. He tried to convince himself that it was a temporary crisis, that every couple goes through difficulties. But there was a growing suspicion inside that it wasn't just him. It all started a few days ago when he received a strange anonymous letter. Are you sure Linda is only with you? She's looking for the best options, like always. Don't be a fool. At first he thought it was a stupid joke. He crumpled up the paper, threw it in the trash, and would have forgotten about it if it hadn't been for Linda's strange behavior. She started coming home late, and when he asked where she had been, she answered evasively. With my friends, she said without looking him in the eye. But when he casually mentioned the name of one of her friends, she was genuinely surprised and said she hadn't seen Linda in weeks. Robert said nothing, but a suspicion stirred inside. He began to watch her, noticing small details he had previously ignored. New jewelry, an expensive bag he definitely didn't buy, the smell of men's cologne on her clothes. He tried not to think the worst, but it was all coming together. While he was trying to deal with Linda, his financial situation was deteriorating. Investments that were supposed to be profitable turned out to be a failure. He tried to get his money back by investing more and more, but he was only driving himself into debt. Bank accounts were shrinking and credit was piling up. He hid it from Linda, realizing that she would not tolerate poverty. But when she started demanding a new car, he realized she'd soon find out the truth. Robert, she said one evening, sitting on the sofa with a glass of wine, there's something I want to talk about. He looked away from the laptop screen and looked at her. Is something wrong? Yeah, you promised that our life would be better than James. So, I'm trying, you can see that. Are you trying? Do you know how much that bag cost that I had to buy myself? Because you've been promising for a month, and you haven't bought it? You didn't have any money, but you bought it? Linda grinned and took a sip of wine. Well, let's just say I found ways to get it. What does that mean? It means you're disappointing me. Are you cheating on me? She didn't answer right away, but her silence said more than words could. Robert slammed his fist on the table, causing the glass to tip over. Damn it, Linda. I left my friend for you, ruined his life, did everything I could to make you happy. She only shrugged. Maybe you are just not as good as you seemed. After that evening, they never spoke normally again. Linda hardly ever slept at home, and Robert started drinking to dull his anger. Money ran out, relationships crumbled, and suspicions grew. What he didn't know was that James was behind it all. Linda sat at a round table in a small cafe on the edge of town, running her finger over the rim of her cappuccino cup. She felt a growing uneasiness that could no longer be ignored. Robert had changed, becoming irritable, withdrawn, often snapping for no apparent reason. He practically stopped talking to her, and when he did open his mouth, his voice sounded muffled and strained. She knew he was having money problems, but he wouldn't tell her the details, and she didn't ask. Linda didn't want to live with a man who hid the truth from her. She thought she deserved better. The phone vibrated on the table, and she flinched, snapping out of her thoughts. The number wasn't saved in her contacts, but something about it seemed familiar. She pressed the answer button. Hello? There was silence on the other end. She was about to drop the call when she heard a man's voice. Linda, you should talk to Robert, before it's too late. She tensed up. Who's that? The voice sounded again, but much harsher now. Just know that he's hiding something from you. Pretty soon, you're not going to be able to joke about it. The call was then dropped. She remained seated, clutching the phone in her hand, feeling an icy chill run down her skin. When she got home, she decided not to waste any time. Robert was in his office, leaning over his laptop, not noticing her presence. She approached cautiously and peered over his shoulder. The screen showed a bank account with a series of strange transactions. Charges, transfers, non-existent companies. Linda pressed on Robert's shoulder, making him wince. What's that? He quickly closed the laptop, but it was too late. She crossed her arms over her chest, looking at him with suspicion and anger. You losing money? It's none of your business, Linda. None of my business. You go into debt, and I'm not supposed to know. I got this. Everything's under control. Under control. Her voice trailed off into a scream. You've been lying to me this whole time. The next day, she received a letter. Inside was a printed bank statement showing Robert's gigantic debts. There's only one line at the bottom. You chose the wrong man. Now you're paying the price. She realized who did it. James. He hadn't just sat back and ruined their lives. Linda sat in her car, staring into the void in front of her. Her hands were gripping the steering wheel with a dead grip, and her thoughts were racing around in her head. She wasn't even trying to kid herself that things would get better. Robert had lost every last dime, leaving them on the brink of financial ruin. But the worst part wasn't even that. He became aggressive, withdrawn, began to blame her for all his problems. He said that she brought him nothing but bad luck, that she was the cause of all his losses. He drank almost every night, got angry over little things, and broke things in the house in fits of anger. Linda couldn't believe it had come to this. She thought she had chosen the perfect man who would give her a better life. But in the end, she was left with nothing. And now she was sitting outside James's house, not knowing if she could find the strength to get out of the car. She stared at the door for a long time, remembering the warmth and comfort she'd felt when she'd walked into this house before. This was once her life. She had everything she could want: financial stability, a caring husband, children, a strong rear end. But then it wasn't enough. She decided she was worthy of more. That love was more important than comfort. She almost pressed the doorknob, ready to get out, but something made her freeze. At that moment, the door of the house swung open. Linda shuddered and froze in disbelief when she saw a slender female figure on the doorstep. The woman laughed, running her fingers through her hair, and James stood behind her, leaning against the door jamb. He said something to her, and she put her hand lightly on his shoulder. Linda felt everything shatter inside. Who is this woman? Why is she here? Why does she touch James so lightly, as if he belonged to her? Linda pressed her fingers against the glass, feeling rage and humiliation coursing through her veins. This was her husband and her home, and now he was with another woman. She got out of the car, slamming the door shut sharply, and almost ran toward the house. But before she could reach the porch, James spotted her. He shifted his gaze to her, and the look on his face made her stop. "Linda?" His voice was flat, without emotion, without interest. She gasped because she hadn't expected such a reaction. "James." Her voice trailed off as she took a step forward, but he didn't even move from his seat. The woman beside him looked at him questioningly, then shifted her gaze to Linda. There was no fear or jealousy in her eyes, just curiosity. It was as if she didn't see a rival in front of her, but a stranger who happened to be in their path. "What are you doing here?" Linda couldn't find anything to say. She hadn't prepared for this conversation. She stammered, feeling her throat constrict with resentment. "Did you come to say something?" He continued to look at her just as calmly, just as indifferently. She didn't know what to say. She wanted to say she was wrong. She wanted to say she wanted to come back. I wanted to apologize, but her pride wouldn't let her do it. "Forget it," she whispered, stepping back. James didn't say a word. He just looked at his new woman again, who smiled and touched his arm, and then they left for the house without looking back. Linda was left standing alone, realizing that nothing else mattered. Linda sat on an old leather couch in a rented apartment she could barely afford. The room seemed cramped, gray and lifeless, with bare walls and dim lamplight. There were no luxuries here, no expensive jewelry that she was used to. All she had left now was a bag of clothes, a couple of cheap makeup bags, and a phone that had been silent for days, and her Robert had disappeared. After she made a row about his debts, he left the apartment, slammed the door, and never came back. For the first few days she was angry, thinking he was just trying to avoid responsibility. Then she started to worry because his number was unavailable, and when she found out he'd skipped town, leaving behind only debts and a ruined reputation, everything inside collapsed completely. He just left her, just as she had once abandoned James. Linda scrolled through the contacts on her phone, but stopped each time, hesitant to call. The friends she had partied with at expensive restaurants were now not picking up the phone. Women who envied her life and dreamed of being in her shoes avoided socializing because now she had nothing else to brag about. Her family, who had always been supportive before, spoke in evasive phrases, hinting that she should work out her own mistakes. And the worst part was that even the kids had stopped calling her. Justin and Kevin. She sued for their custody, fought, convinced the court that James couldn't be a good father to them. She spent energy, money, nerves just to prove her superiority. But in the end, they chose it for themselves. A few days ago, she'd gotten up the courage to call Justin after all. "Hi, baby." She tried to speak calmly, as if nothing was wrong. A pause hung on the other end, followed by a cold voice. "Don't call me that." She staggered back, feeling her heart clench with pain. "I'm sorry." She swallowed, but her voice was still shaking. "How are you? How's Kevin?" A new pause. "We're good." Her lips trembled because it sounded like, "We're better off without you." She gathered the last of her strength to say the main thing. "I want to see you." She hoped to hear joy, anticipation, anything resembling love. But the answer shattered her utterly. "I don't think that's a good idea." She froze, not believing her ears. "What did you say?" Justin sighed, and then quietly said the words that crashed into her mind. "We don't feel like you're our mom anymore." The phone fell out of her hands to the floor, and she just sat staring in front of her, feeling the emptiness that was consuming her from the inside out. Linda couldn't remember how many hours she had sat in complete silence. Time had lost its meaning, because now she had nothing left. She left James for a beautiful life, but ended up losing her family, status, money, and the respect of her children. She destroyed everything she'd lived for. Now she had no past, no future. James sat in his office, going through old documents he had been meaning to sort through for a long time. All that paperwork had long ago lost its meaning because his life had changed more than ever before. He no longer spent his nights thinking about the past, no longer looked for answers and mistakes, no longer regretted the betrayals he had experienced. All of that was far behind him. Now he had a new life, new goals, a new woman who truly valued him. His children lived with him, and he did everything he could to make their future stable. Linda was now only a memory that no longer caused pain or anger. He thought he would never hear her voice again. But in the evening, a call came in from an unknown number. He hesitated only a moment, but then pressed the answer button. "Hello, James." The voice was weak, almost unrecognizable. He didn't answer right away, giving himself time to realize it was really her. A few seconds of silence passed, but Linda didn't hold out first. "You didn't drop the call. So not all is lost, huh?" "Linda, what do you want?" She held her breath, as if trying to gather her last strength. "I wanted to talk, to meet you, to see you, to see the kids." Her voice trembled. It lacked the confidence with which she had once ruined his life. "Why?" His voice remained even, impassive, like a stranger's. There was silence on the other end, and then she exhaled as if she was about to say something important. "I was stupid, James. I messed up. You know I didn't mean for it to turn out this way." He covered his eyes, remembering her smirk the night she'd left for Robert. "You just accept it, James. We both know you can't change anything." "I don't hold a grudge against you, Linda," he said calmly, feeling no more anger or pity. She inhaled hastily, clinging to his words as if she saw a chance for salvation. Then maybe we can try to make things right. I've changed, James. I've realized everything. I want to go back. Back where?" Linda froze, as if she hadn't expected such a question. He continued, "Our home. The one you left for a better life. Or to the children who no longer call you mother." She started to say something inaudible, but he didn't let her finish. "Or maybe you want to come back to me. The man you replaced and then cut out of your life." Linda was silent, and in that silence her desperation was palpable. "James," she whispered, "I just wish I had a chance." And then gave a definitive answer. "A chance, just like the one I had when you kicked me out of the house." She breathed heavily, realizing she had lost everything. "I made a mistake." James smiled, but there was no sympathy in his voice. "It's not my problem anymore." He took the phone away from his ear, hit the reset button, and deleted her number forever. The story was over. Linda was left sitting in a dark room, holding a phone in her hands that would never ring again. Everything she had accomplished was gone. Everything she had would never come back. She had lost everything: her home, her family, herself, and James, whom she had betrayed for a pipe dream, no longer even remembered she existed. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. If you liked the story, please give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm show my content more often. If you are new to the channel, do not forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep making more stories for you.